We just heard a snippet of David Bowie's version of Criminal World, followed by Peter's original version. And Peter Godwin is our guest this evening. Peter, just for fun, because we always like bizarre stories around here, tell us about the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to you during your career.
What you might find strange, because it was pretty strange, are some of the things I was required to do by creative TV directors when I was promoting my records in Europe. For example, promoting Images of Heaven on a TV show in Holland, and the director had me, every time I got to a chorus, I had this knife, and I had to cut my way through a screen. There were like 6 screens, I think, and every now and then I had to rip my way through the screen and step through it like a paper screen. And, the camera was on the other side to capture me breaking through. I don't have any idea quite what his concept was.
Yeah, how does that fit in with the song, the lyric?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We didn't get into that really too deeply. It was just, you just sort of went with the flow in those days, and I think at the same time there was a woman rolling on the floor in a piece of gold material, which maybe was his take on the album cover and that gold Anthony Price dress. I don't know.
That is pretty bizarre, because when you think Images of Heaven, you don't think someone with a knife slicing their way into another dimension. Although maybe you do. Maybe this guy did.
Yes, I think if you've been on Facebook a while, you'll soon find people that think that's what the song's about.
By the way, let's mention that, because obviously people want to, they can chat with you on Facebook. They can leave comments. How do they get a hold of you? First of all, how do they get Nuevo, which we're going to play, and how do they get, to be part of the Peter Godwin fan experience?
Well, I really want them to come and join me on the Facebook, because I'm trying to gather there all my fans from everywhere, and I've not been at it that long, and there's a couple of thousand of us there. I've also got a personal page, so you'll find 2 pages. One is, Facebook Peter Godwin fans, and the other is just, I think, Peter Godwin PG, but it's easy to find. You put in Peter Godwin, you will find me. There's almost 3,000 on one page and 2,000 and a half or something on the other. I'd love to have everybody come there, bring their friends, anybody that like my music, and everything's there. All the videos are there. There are going to be new videos coming through. I've done one for a song called Chocolate from the Nuevo album. And then there's nuevomusic.com. There is actually a website for Nuevo, and you can even download the album there. And I'd love you to, of course. And you can stream it and listen to it, and there's some videos to look at, including I threw Babies in the Mountains video on there as well. But those videos are also on the Facebook fan page. So please, everyone, do join me. And I am there. It's not some avatar. It's actually Peter Godwin. And I do interact, and I do chat, and I do as much of it as I can, and I'm there quite a lot.
Do you follow music today, perhaps as enthusiastically as you did when you were younger? Because everybody, when they're a teenager, discovers music and it becomes their life or whatever. Do you follow music with the same enthusiasm, or more with, I would imagine, a more mature ear?
Well, that's an interesting question. He says, playing for time. No, I'm not playing for time. I actually know exactly what I feel about that. The truth is, yes, when I was young, like everybody, and I started making music when I was a child. Don't ask me why, but I always had the urge to make music. I was bought an accordion by my father because he could see that I liked to play instruments, even with toy instruments, as a small child. And he happened to play by ear the accordion. That was his instrument. So he taught me the accordion. Afterwards, I taught myself guitar and other things. But, I was writing little tunes and songs when I was 7 or 8 years old. I just had that urge to do it. At the same time, I was absorbing all the music that was around me. And, of course, the music you hear usually in your teens and sometimes in your college years, if you want to call it that,
sure.
Late teens, early 20s. I think that because of the hormonal condition you're in, that you are so kind of pumped up chemically, even if you're not, experimenting with anything outside of your own body, your emotions run so high and deep that all the music you hear then, it really does kind of, I don't know, ingrain itself in your heart and your soul forever, you know? So usually the music we're most passionate about forever and that touches us and moves us when we hear it is the music that we loved at that time. But then to answer your question, you know, more directly, do I still listen to music in that way? Honestly, I do. I mean, I've never stopped listening to and discovering new music. I'm actually not someone that lives in the past, if you like.
Right.
Having said that, I live in an era, you know, which is quite amazing, where YouTube Nation gives the whole history of recorded music from the whole planet and every culture available to me and to everybody else and every 16-year-old, if they want to find it, to listen to. And I think that's an amazing thing, and I think it's creating a world where people are not just listening to the latest thing from a talent show on TV, although some people obviously are doing that, or they wouldn't be selling a lot of records on the back of it.
Right.
But there are people who don't just want that one flavor, and they're creating their own unusual combination of music. But I listen to new things. You know, I was listening to Hertz, for example. You know Hertz?
Sure.
You know, who've done extremely well and put out their first album last year. That's pretty new. Of course, it has got quite an 80s flavor, and that kind of caught my interest just to see what they were doing with that.
Well,
but then again, a lot of contemporary music does, doesn't it?
It's like that younger generation, I guess those people in there that are 18, 19, 20, discovered all that music again.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I had this discussion with a friend, actually, the other day, and what suddenly came to my mind was this proposition, and I don't know if you'll agree, but I think, okay, one reason I think that the 80s and in the 90s was a little dismissed was because people were looking at it very superficially. You know, they were more talking about hairstyles and music.
Right.
You know, and they were looking at some of the more superficial aspects, and they were ignoring the great span of music in the 80s. I think what's happening now is an embracing of, I'd actually say, the 70s and 80s together. The music of that era is so rich. I mean, whether you're talking about established artists in that period, such as Bowie and even, you know, Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder and all sorts of people who suddenly found their form and did some of the most original music in that period, as well as new acts. And I think what people have realized is this isn't just a recycling of a period for, let's say, 40-somethings recapturing their teens.
Right.
I think this is a new phenomenon based on what I was just talking about regarding YouTube and how that makes you look at music more objectively in a way because it's all there. So what I mean by that is I actually think people are suddenly realizing that coming after all the excitement of the 60s and some very innovative bands, obviously the Beatles, you know.
Right, sure.
Each record sometimes could be seen as a whole direction in itself. You know, Strawberry Fields could be one direction, you know, for others to follow up. But what happened in the 70s and 80s is there was this huge emphasis on creating something new, that this was what artists did. And, you know, as opposed to just show business and just entertainment, if you had more depth, more levels, more layers, your ambition was to do something new. Your ambition was to do something different from other people you heard, a reaction sometimes against it. At the same time, it was often to do something different from what you'd done before. I mean, the template for that would be David Bowie, probably.
Right.
You know, but then think how many people who then followed up on that notion, such as Prince to some extent, Madonna definitely. So, you know, not just repeating a formula, but trying to reinvent yourself endlessly to be original and create new art, you know, rather like a painter going through different periods of experimentation. And I think that's what actually, if you look back on it and you look at all the different wide-ranging work of that period, it was very rich. You know,
you had ska, punk, electronica. You know, you had pop.
Even new metal. You know, Iron Maiden.
Right. Yeah. All that stuff.
A new take on kind of hard rock, as you might say. Then again, you look at the music that began its life then, and you see how one thing led to another in a very interesting way. I I was once at the Fun House, where in the days of like when breakdancing was first really the rage, you know,
Right.
in the early '80s, and I was there because Jellybean Benitez was DJing. He happened to like my music, and he particularly liked Emotional Disguise, and he used to spin back to back the instrumental, the French Emotions, French version, the regular mix. And kids would breakdance to it. I was actually there one night, and this is the interesting thing. I was there with Madonna, who was his girlfriend at the time.
Right.
And he just made off the Holiday and that album with her as a producer, and with Ralph Hutter from Kraftwerk.
Wow.
Now, there's a connection, because, you know, you wouldn't probably have, if I can dare to say this, hip-hop without Kraftwerk. You know, Africa Bambaataa sampled Trans-Europe Express, you know,
Right.
looped bits of that, and picked up on those kind of, and even R&B and the way it uses electronics nowadays was really pioneered in a sound sense by bands like Kraftwerk, especially Kraftwerk, and those that were influenced by them, which of course included a lot of very interesting English bands as well.
Right.
And as well as quite a few German. And, you know, there's been such that even then there was all this kind of interesting hybrids and influences floating around as people look to further horizons. But now that's the way of the world. Plus, with MySpace and the internet in general, everyone can make a record. And with the, you know, the means of production, as it were, being a laptop sometimes,
Right.
everyone can make their own music. So on top of everything else, people from all nations have got potentially a bigger voice, an equal voice.
We've been talking to Peter Godwin this evening, and we're going to close out this interview with a track from Nuevo called Skin. But thanks so much, Peter, for being on the show with us this evening.
Thanks, Ghosty. It flew far and wide, didn't it?
It did. But, hey, listen, it's free and open here. All we have to do is just bookend it with songs. That's all.
Okay, and stay in touch.